Okay, hello everybody. Lovely to see so many faces on the stand. I really appreciate you coming over. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kai Gordon-Weiland from Atriis. Kai, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, from Atriis Technologies, Kai Gordon-Weiland. I'm CSO based in Portugal, and I'm very much looking forward to this fireside with my good old friend, David.
Thank you, Kai. I am the Chief Product Officer for TripStax, so if you don't know me, please come find me afterwards. We're going to talk about being passive, or paying to be passive. So passive segments are a thing that the GDS uses, or that agents use inside of the GDS to transmit and keep information that otherwise wouldn't live inside of the GDS, and use that to power their back offices and pass information downstream. Now, this is super important, and this is one of the hidden workhorses of the industry. Many people don't know about it because actually this little thing, this imaginary piece of information that we pass, is used at enormous scale across this whole industry. If you look across this room, all the agents in this room, almost every single one of them somewhere will have this in their architecture. And what it's doing primarily is powering invoices for things that don't live inside of the GDS. Now, that sounds really boring, right? There's this idea that you've got to pay for a thing, so I need to be able to give you a document that tells you you've got to pay for. So I need a system to be able to do that. And if your current system doesn't allow you to actually do that, then you have to use this passive. Now, in our database, we've just gone through 1 million passives that we've databased from our customers. Now, if you think about that, a passive segment could be a pretend flight from London to New York. That's one segment, right? So if we have an average trip of 2 segments, so let's say London to New York and back again, that's 500,000 from 1 million. And then we have an average cost of, let's say, 500 quid for an average trip. That million passives represents the entire trading of a £250 million agency annually. So it carries this enormous amount of data. And the reason it's important is because back in the day, when I was an agent, when I was 20 years old, passives were free. They didn't cost anything, and you just use them every once in a while. But now, if you walk around the tech show here, there's 30, 40 different companies trying to sell you NDC and disaggregated content. And those things have to go back into the GDS for most of these agencies. So that million passives actually represents a kind of a health of the industry. Because what we're seeing here is this old architecture being played out with modern content. So I've talked enough. I'm going to pass over to Kai. So Kai, Atriis is one of the best booking tools on the market, if not the best. You've got both a booking engine that customers use, and you have an agent platform that the agents use. What are you seeing around passives in your database?
I think the issue in the industry nowadays is that we do have content fragmentation, and travel agencies try to desperately get that content into their legacy processes again. They have dependencies to mid and back office systems. They are missing on API connections, which would be the modern way to feed into these systems. But these systems often are not capable to digest that. And the way how most of the systems are working is to read on passive PNRs and to read on PNR segments. It's an old technology. It exists for decades. It's something which has been invented. Passive segments probably exist since the beginning of the 90s, so you can just imagine for how long we are working with these kind of formats. And you might not believe it, they have not changed since ever then, right? What in technology is able to afford no progress and innovation for the past 3 or 4 decades, right? And then you can imagine how limited this is. The world was not needing really passives back in the times. They have been designed in a moment when the world was defragmented. It was very consolidated. You could book everything via one single channel, and nowadays you can't, right? So when you're looking into different kind of environments, all of a sudden you see that you find only 50 to 60% of what you really need in GDS Edifact, and everything else is outside of the GDS, which means the need to anyhow get that data in a rich content is very important. You can expect excellent data for reporting purposes, for sourcing purposes, but also for something as simple as invoicing. You want to have accurate invoicing, including the reference fields, including everything what you need. Your finance people are expecting that you are delivering proper invoicing processes. Your credit card systems need to have reference fields, descriptive billing data, what they can also take over and then implement in the processes, including backline integration. So it's a huge thing to manage data well. And the fragmentation of travel content was enabling to get better value on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, it requires us to find new solutions and new ways and more innovative ways to accommodate this data feed into mid and back office systems and including ERP systems from a corporate perspective. And this is the mission where we are working on, apart from including this content in our platform, also finding ways how we can help travel agencies from a passive segment perspective if they want it, but also from an API integration perspective. And that's why we are also very close partners. And this is what we are doing.
Thanks, Kai. So, from a workflow point of view, the passive gives you 3 challenges, right? You've got inefficiencies inside of your agency if you're having to put information into the passive, right? You've got to take this information from somewhere, you've got to put it somewhere. The second challenge is that you're exposing all of your spend to the GDS. So they know what you're doing because everything you're doing is going into that passive segment. And then the last one, of course, is a financial challenge. And this is one of the main reasons that we want to talk about it, is because what we see as part of our work in the US markets, in these markets, is that the GDSs have contracts which now have the capability to charge you for passives. So for the buyers in the room, if you don't know what a passive is, if your agents are using that, part of the cost of managing those passives is coming back to you through your charges. So one of the reasons for eliminating passives is to try and get to a commercial efficiency. And there's this huge area of risk here, because if you think back to that million passives that's in our database, if I'm an agent, so I've worked in various agencies inside this room. I haven't been in TMC for ages, so I can talk about this now. But if you take a typical GDS segment incentives, a couple of quid for a live segment for something that's booked directly from the airline, if they then charge a couple of quid for you to use a passive segment, and you've had to buy that piece of content from another person, I'm going from £2 of revenue to £4 of cost. That's a £6 swing to my bottom line. If I've got 1 million of those, that could be as much as £6 million. So that sounds fairly dramatic, right? But those costs have to be managed. And the GDSs have, they have contracts in place that say, okay, of a certain percentage of your lives, then we won't charge you. But that risk remains. And if the market shifts and you're still using those passives, then you've actually got a very significant threat to your business. And I think we talked about a bit about this before the session, Kai, this idea of a postcode lottery. So if you are, as an agent, negotiating a GDS contract, and you are in a market where that GDS is well exposed, so let's take Amadeus, let's say, in South America. Well-exposed GDS, got loads of customers there. They don't want to lift and shift any intra. They're not that. They've got plenty of market share. So they don't need to offer you a contract that's very aggressive around this part of the platform. North America, however, Sabre are dominant. Amadeus really want that market. So suddenly, your North American agents will be getting contracts that will have much more favorable terms towards passives. And this sounds really archaic, right? But these things drive so much content. You have no idea the sheer level of these things being used. That creates an enormous amount of risk because, Kai, if, for example, there's a large loss. So we talk a lot about PwC in the market. They're one of the biggest purchasers, a couple of billion spend. Let's say that they stop using Kayak for Business and they want to go and use an agency that sits on Sabre. Well, that's a huge piece of content that's moved from Amadeus to Sabre. All of a sudden, Amadeus now needs to be more aggressive in the market, which means that contract's got to change. So by default, your agents then are in a landscape where, they could be in a more advantaged position for their passive. It's a world that's very, very important to deleverage because it's a barometer of health for me. So if you think of all of that content, in terms of the passives in your database, what do you see as a sort of a percentage of what's going through your work?
Generally, more than 40% of all the bookings which are being booked through our platform are outside of the classic GDS artifact. So just to understand the dimension, it means, translated, in 40% of the cases, our corporate customers do not find anymore the best value through a classic GDS channel. Right? This imposes that 40% of the segments need to find a different way how to get back into the respective fulfillment processes, which is a lot of bookings. Right? So looking at the fact that there are millions of bookings to be processed, 40% means million of bookings where you need to find alternative ways to feed. The classic way would be a GDS passive. Now, the GDS contracts have a little bit of a slack they are giving to the TMCs, but as from a certain ratio, they are charging, which is fair enough. Imagine you would be a distribution system you would not achieve on a revenue from a distribution cost point of view. You need to find other possibilities to charge for the services you are delivering. And delivering a data transfer service is also a service. So they are monetizing on the respective data transfer services. It's a natural thing which does happen. So now there are two different ways how Atriis is supporting the customers. Either we are using the classic PNR, so we have a PNR build engine, which is building for Travelport, for Amadeus, and for Sabre the respective segments and references and remarks needed. Right? Classic way. The innovative way, the digital integration using an API. The API is completely enriched. It has a completely different capability than what a PNR can do. The PNR is an ADIFACT format. It was invented 45 years ago. It is from a flexibility, from an agility point of view, not made to carry rich data. Right? It's simply not made for it, from a passive perspective. Probably from an active, but not from a passive segment perspective. From an API perspective, there are literally no limitations on how many data you are transferring. If there's valuable information supporting you from an invoicing, from a finance perspective, from a reporting perspective, from a sourcing perspective, from a benchmarking perspective, no chance to do this in the backbone of a GDS passive segment. Doesn't work. Via an API, you can.
And I think this is a really, really important point, because if you look at all of the stands out here, there's an awful lot, firstly, of money. I don't know, they obviously have it, I don't, being spent on these stands. But there's a lot of content out there. People spend a lot of time making their content as rich and as engaging as possible. And yet, we as an industry decide to then take all of that lovely, beautiful content and slam it into this plain text world of the passive. And that means that everything that happens downstream is only a subset of everything it could have been, which is why API connectivity, like the one that we have with Atriis, is so important. It's I liken it to taking, the Mona Lisa and then sticking it in an Etch-a-Sketch, because it still looks a bit like the Mona Lisa, but you've lost all of the detail. And I think this is important when it comes to outcomes, because as the agencies in this room look to evolve their value propositions, what they need is good quality data. If you're over at the Innovation Face-Off, only in the last half an hour, there's people there talking about standing technologies on AI, agentic AI, and looking at data sets to be able to evaluate what you do. You can only do that if you've got good numbers, good accessible numbers. And if they're being driven in through the passive, then you've only got a tiny little fraction of a data set to be able to actually work with. And that means that your outcomes are limited. It means that your capabilities are limited. So if you're looking to say, put in some new rules around compliance, or you want to be able to monitor behavior, that's much more restricted when you work with suppliers who have to use the passive PNR. So this idea, getting passives make me go grrr. They really do. But this idea that you have to look to evolve to try and eliminate this part of your architecture, I think is super important. And as the industry moves forward and you continue disaggregation, as content looks to move more and more direct, more and more out of the GDS, then this becomes an ever more important part. So as a buyer, if you're not talking to your agents about whether or not they are connecting with APIs, whether or not they have passives in their architectures, then it's a conversation you need to have, because you need to understand what your agents are doing from a technology point of view. How sophisticated are they? Are they passing costs to you that you could avoid by using an agent that actually doesn't have this? And I think it's one of the most niche, but one of the most important parts of the travel industry, because this is a part of the workhorse that no one ever really sees, and yet it powers so much of what we do and also constrains so much of what we do.
Another area which is important is that the passive segment is a placeholder. It's a type machine. If you do a change on your itinerary, the passive segment doesn't change automatically. It's not actionable. If you have a flight and you create a passive segment for a flight, you will not get itinerary updates. You will not get flight disruption updates. You will not see if the flight is being cancelled. You will not see if somebody got stuck in an airport. In an active segment, you see it. Where do you get the data from when you are not seeing it in the GDS? Because this was not booked in the GDS. It's just a placeholder segment in order to read an information which you can use in a backline process. It means it's a non-actionable segment. A passive segment is completely non-actionable. It's just created as a replica in order to create something, a process in the backline. It's not created to do live support, right? When you have an active segment, it means that everything what happens with this flight, with this hotel, with this car, you are able to action it, to rebook it, to change it, to influence it. Passive, no. It's dead. It's a dead segment. When you use an API, it means you are directly connected to the respective supplier, which can be, yes, a GDS system. They also have APIs, but it also can be any kind of supplier you are connecting. It can be a Booking.com, right, an Expedia. It can be a British Airways, a Lufthansa Group for NDC. It can be ground transportation services. What happens when these changes need to be processed? And the only way how to do it is not through a passive, but through an API. That's why we need to understand that this very uncomfortable and technically a little bit clunky topic of APIs is very much underrated, because working entirely and the entire process on passives is creating friction. Imagine a 24/7 service has only access to a passive segment. You are calling the 24/7 service, it's not actionable. The only way what now the 24/7 service can do is call directly with the supplier, being stuck 3 hours in the wait line in the call center in order to get something changed, hoping that he is able to read the information in a proper way and providing the supplier with the right information to do this. When you use APIs, not needed. APIs is online access to information, online access to data transmission, but also actionable itineraries, right? It's a completely different quality of, as a travel manager, to work on your travel program, and as a TMC to flexibly work with the respective content.
Thank you, Kai. So I think it's a super important point. This idea of fragmented content, this idea of connectivity, this idea of financial efficiency, both towards the agency's own bottom line, but also towards your own commercials as buyers. The idea of agility. So if I'm slamming everything into the GDS, it makes me very difficult for me to change that GDS. So you lose a lot of commercial agility here. Just out of interest, so if I'm putting passive segments in here and it talks to the mid-back office, we have to use these little files. I don't know if anybody know what these are? Anyone? So these are little plain text files. These were invented in 1972, and we still use them. I wasn't invented in 1972, and I'm pushing 50, right? So the MER file, the machine interface record, is a name so old it's haunted, right? This is an ancient process, and we should not look to leverage this to drive our systems. So from a buyer's perspective, passives are important because it gives you a state of the health of your agencies. From an agent's perspective, passives not only represent operational inefficiency, but it also represents an enormous area of financial risk should the market turn against passives. And ultimately, with disaggregation, the big three, the oligopoly, the word my CEO Jack likes to use quite a lot. Thanks, mate. Love that word. Ultimately, if they continue to lose content, they're going to need to make their money somewhere. So ultimately, it's either come from the agents or it's going to come from you guys.
So coming now to the respective feeds and why we have been creating APIs. There are two different directions of APIs. There are the directions to feed our platform, which is the suppliers who are feeding in us, GDS systems, direct connects. And then there we have outgoing APIs. And the outgoing APIs are going to systems, system platforms, which can digest the respective API information and then feed the backend process. So if we are looking here now on that process, and we look on the GDS and how the world is being built today, and then feeding all the different kinds of systems, it creates a huge dependency, doesn't it? Also the respective limitations you are having, because we are using these super old data formats. So we try to squeeze in a new world of digitalization and of APIs, we try to downgrade all these data formats back into a 50-year-old format in order to do something innovative and new with it. I can tell you that's a challenge, right? It is a challenge. Nobody wants to confess it, but it is a challenge. So what we are tackling is that through the TripStax platform, we are feeding via the APIs rich data content, and then TripStax is doing its magic.
Indeed, and I think it's something that we look to do as much as possible from a data aggregation point of view. Ultimately, what you want are good numbers. You know, the whole world is revolving around numbers, revolving around the ability to access your numbers. And if everything is pushed into this world through a passive, then unfortunately that's not going to be a very successful world. So really, I'm trying to think of some takeaways here for the guys, because I'm just thinking time-wise, where are we at? Yeah, we're somewhere there, and we should probably have some time if there's any questions in the audience. What I would recommend, not only to purchase our softwares, thank you very much, ding, But investigate what it is and how your partners are working, because it's so important to be able to understand the things that drive your agencies. Have we got anyone from a CTD, from a large corporate, in the audience? No? Or put your hands up. But if there is anyone from CTD where you're doing your own bookings, but you're also working with your agencies, again, passives are super important. This idea of health, this idea of where are your agents in the technology curve? Because as the market continues to fragment, if your agents are having to use these technologies, it's only ever going to push cost towards you. And that's super duper important. So whilst it's a very niche subject, as I said, and it makes me go like this, passives, it's very, very important to understand what it is. And it is ultimately one of the hidden workforces of the industry. Kai, any wrap-ups?
If you are taking your considerations, how you are managing your data and your information, and you would like to enter into the world of higher flexibility and agility with your content, the question how you manage your data is going to be automatically related to this. So if you take your considerations, you would like to expand as a TMC on the respective content, what you would deliver to your clients. Or if you are a corporate travel manager and you would like to expand the pool of content you will deliver to your travelers in order to bring down leakage, in order to bring down maverick buying because they find content somewhere else cheaper. You would like to make sure that everything is coming back into a compliant booking channel. You automatically will also need to consider what are you doing with the backline data and information. So it sounds only superficially as a boring topic, but it starts to get exciting as soon as you are touching to the world of multi-content and not just consuming content from one single source.
Cool, thanks, man. So that is the world of the passive segment. Then it just remains for me to thank you guys for coming. There will be drinks and DJ very shortly. Kai and I will remain on the stand if you wish to continue to talk about the joys of TMC architecture. And please, next time you go anywhere near your agencies, ask them if they are passive or passive-aggressive. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.